my measure of success is if our grandchildren can have a job involving space resources.
Hi, and welcome to the FinancialFox, Finance, Investment, and Crypto with a Twist. I'm your host, Steffy B. I'm the founder of PR company Cassiopeia Services, and every week I bring to you my favorite conversation with investment expert, market disruptors, mover and shakers, and the coolest project in crypto. Today, I've decided to dive into the space industry. Is it the next trillion-dollar industry? With high levels of private funding, advancement in new technology, and a growing public sector interest in space exploration, the future is looking towards the stars. Morgan Stanley estimated that the global space industry could generate revenue of more than $1 trillion or more in 2040. So let's break this down with my guest today, Simon Drake, CEO of Space Ventures Investors. But before we go into the interviews, remember that we are not financial advisors and all the content here is for informational purposes only. Also, if you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, make sure that you hit the subscribe button, and also don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date with our news and interviews. Let's go straight into our conversation with Simon. Hi, Simon. How are you?
Very good, thanks.
Brilliant. It's so good to have you on the show to talk about, investment in the space industry, which seems really exciting, but I think is much needed to kind of shed some light on actually what is the current situation, the opportunities, what kind of areas of space investing are explored more at the moment. And I know that is something that you are pretty much focused on with your company, isn't it?
Yes, we very much focus on what's going on in space and from different levels.
Okay, so if I have to start with, the billion-dollar question, what is space investing?
Well, most people have already invested in space without realizing it. For example, if you're using a smartphone and you're using it to guide you to a restaurant, it's using signals from the GPS satellites, which are an important part of space infrastructure. If you're not using the GPS satellites, you're probably using the European satellites. So that's also an important part of space infrastructure. So we already use it. What's happening next is innovations in technology and capital markets. Innovations that support this new technology means that we have a new branch of space opening up. So it's a very exciting time.
I mean, it is exciting, but so far we have mainly seen dot-com billionaires, space entrepreneurs, pouring money into this sector, like, Musk, Bezos, Branson. So do you maybe want to explain what has happened until now and how these investment opportunities are going to change and become more mainstream rather than just led by these big guys?
Yeah, this is a really good point. The dot-com billionaires club of early space entrepreneurs have done a fantastic job. Whether you like them or hate them, and I'm talking about Musk, Bezos, Branson, as just three easy examples. They did make their money in the dot-com era, which enabled them to have a base of capital to explore their ambitions in this new industry, which is space. So I kind of look at that as a closed avenue. They've got their businesses, they've got their network of capital providers, and they're off. And they're conquering things which are quite amazing in their own different ways. For example, Virgin Galactic is really focusing on space tourism. Space tourism has been talked about, I don't know, ever since I think the 70s, you know, that's almost 50 years.
Yeah, well, I still need to have somebody inviting me to dinner on the moon, though.
Yeah, don't worry, that will happen, but we just hope we're alive. Yeah, as a quick roundup on the dot-com billionaires, you know, they've done a great job. They're in an excellent position to take advantage of their position, and really they have access to the great professionals, which provide a very clear framework of where they want to go, how they want to get there, and they don't really stand on each other's toes, so to say. Now, what comes after that is, if you're not a dot-com billionaire and you're a space entrepreneur and you're young, we kind of live in a different world now where we have decentralized finance. But at the other time, we have SPACs as investment vehicles, which were previously not used for space, but now they are. And also we have, for emerging space startups, we have equity crowdfunding. And also for other space companies who can issue shares, that's a way of raising capital. And the relationship is more one-on-one. So if you're a shareholder via a SPAC, you don't really have any kind of say with management. If you're an equity crowdfunding shareholder, recipient, or via an equity crowdfunding process, you become a shareholder in a space company, you kind of have a very, very small point. But as a direct shareholder in a company, you kind of have more leeway. The question is, what is the space investor comfortable with, and how deep do they want to go with a space investment? Another quick example is we now have space ETFs. So you could say theoretically, you know what, I see future in this allocated amount that, you know, you're comfortable with, and set and forget, except when there's a market crash, which is a great time to buy, you know.
Interesting. So basically you're saying people can get exposure to space, investing through different kind of option like SPACs, funds, ETFs. So, but tell me a bit more on what these organization, institution are focused on when they said we are investing in space. For example, SPACs, what they invest in, what is the investment case?
Well, the individual SPACs, you really have to look at what they're doing. For example, Rocket Lab, you know, is focusing on a very small section of the launch market and can always scale up. So you have to look at each individual SPAC by SPAC basis to understand what they're offering to space and what is the demand for that service as well. And what we've seen recently is interesting. We're just talking about the dot-com era. You know, the dot-com era was kind of, to me, is repeating itself 20 years later. You know, I think 2020 up until now, we're starting to see a certain hangover from a certain party. And these things happen, you know, there's always a reversion to the mean in markets. But what happened earlier was, you know, a year or two ago, there are a lot of space SPACs coming to the market. I was just checking their share prices. I'm not here to give financial investing advice. I'm just here to talk about space investing in general. But what you can see clearly is a lot of these space SPACs, they've all had a wake-up call to the reality of the markets in general from a macro point of view. But when you go back and look at their business models, you know, whether the price was $10 or $5, because most SPACs start at $10, you know, you have to look at exactly what they do and how that fits into the big picture. And break them down. I mean, some of them are focused on connectivity. Some of them want to be the next launch provider. It's a question of, well, who's going to win? You know, it's very hard. It's very hard to say at the moment. But it is a good time to be investing, because now the prices that were previously a bit too frothy, they've kind of come down a bit. And if you're a space investor and you're used to stocks, you know, now you can start patiently waiting, you know, for an entry point. It's quite interesting.
So if we have to talk about the different verticals, let's say, that these SPACs or funds they focus on, you already mentioned space tourism. What are the other areas that these investment vehicles are maybe more focused on?
Yeah, good point. Well, if when I think of an investment vehicle and I say look at a space fund or something that says it's a space fund, and then you break down the actual investments they make, sometimes they are just, they might invest in a large aerospace company that has one part of its business focused on space. And to me, that's like, well, that's not really a space fund. That's a space fund that's going for the security of a of investing in a large aerospace company and saying, oh yeah, we're space, but really they're just kind of lining up kind of blue chip aerospace companies and maybe a tiny bit invested in something that is really unique and innovative. So that is my brief overview of an investment vehicle process. But this is kind of normal, what you'd expect of, say, a fund where they try and spread all their investments and take on as little risk as possible. On the other side, if you're an individual and you want to do your homework, there are quite a few interesting small satellite companies, emerging players that are quite interesting. But you've got to do your homework and you've got to really understand, what are they offering, and who are the teams and where they're based. And what is their valuation? Have they been a victim of a frothy valuation, which is quite often not their fault?
But talking about satellite focus company, where actually Morgan Stanley estimated that the satellite broadband will represent 50% of the projected growth of the global space economy by 2040. So kind of like extended the broadband internet service using, the space, and then helping also bring the cost of data down, explore opportunity, and get more people connected. How do you see the timeline here?
Yeah, the big promise of internet for everyone, no matter where you are, it kind of gives me a bit of food for thought, because I don't want to put a dampener on the party, but most people have internet anyway. Internet's pretty much been rolled out, by physical cables. And sometimes I think that this global connectivity goal is it's very nice. I get it. Sure, why not? But the practicality is, I live in a city. I don't need satellite internet connectivity. It's only going to be in rural areas.
Yeah.
And the question is, what do they need to watch Netflix via satellite if you live in a rural area? And to do that, we're going to have to put, lots of satellites in low Earth orbit, which are, kind of shaky orbits. They're not the best. So in some ways I say, yeah, it's a good idea in principle, but the actual implementing it has other factors. How many satellites do you need, to make this happen? What happens when, they start, becoming, intersecting the course of space debris? Is it worth it? Why not allocate that money to developing real space infrastructure projects? Why not go the next leap and say, oh, you know what, we're going to mine the moon, make a choice, deliver Netflix via, at a broadband level via satellite to a remote location, or search space for resources. So, take your pick. Now, I'm in the search space for resources camp. So that's how that's my thinking. But if a company wants to provide global broadband, connectivity, I get it. It's up to them. But I don't see that I see a lot of companies saying they're going to do it. That's the vision, but I don't think that there's room for them all. Sooner or later, they're going to have to, merge, acquire, and the one with the best engineering will win.
Yeah, and it seems like there are quite a lot of challenges, you said, because you need to build an infrastructure that actually works, and then you need to balance the cost with actually the usage. But let's talk a bit more about space mining resources, because it's quite interesting. I mean, we know that natural resources are limited on Earth, and there is always demand and more demand as the technology also grows. So, what can we actually mine in the space?
Everything.
Love that.
Okay. I've said that. Now I've got to walk it back. Okay. When you read in a newspaper that there's a meteorite worth 1 trillion, it's true, but it's going to destroy a lot of that capital, all that wealth. That 1 trillion wealth is going to be taken away by the expense to get there, the expense to process, an asteroid and strip out platinum group metals, and then ship it back to Earth. By which time the price will have gone down because of the supply demand. But I think in terms of the 5 or 10 years, 20 years, what is possible, and the main thing at the moment is to look at what's realistic. And what do we need? And so there are finite resources on Earth, and what can be more sustainable than going into space? I can't think of anything else. But where do we go? I mean, the obvious question is, what's the closest planet? Well, that's the moon. What's on the moon? Well, strangely enough, the moon is a real kind of barren place. Like, it doesn't have that, readily available water, but there is water trapped in the North and South poles. The space agencies are working on, trying to answer the big question: how much water is actually there? How much energy is required to extract that water from regolith? And then with water, that gives you propulsion and the ability to support life. So once you look at space resources, space mining, the big picture, and you kind of zero in on what's realistic in our lifetime, there are tangible goals. And it's quite interesting to see that space agencies are really, trying to meet these goals to, land in craters, explore them, understand them, and make that bridge between, theoretical versus reality. What is the deal about water on the moon? How much effort does it take to get it out? And these are questions that need to be solved. Now, I look at water as, it's propulsion, great, but a lot of what I work on is looking at resources in general on the moon. Where's the metals? If you want to go to the moon and you need to create a base, well, you're going to use in situ resource utilization. Where's iron and silicate in the same location? Because then it's easy to go there, extract it, and build something from it, rather than haul it all the way from Earth.
Yeah, okay, interesting. If we, aside of the moon, what about other planets? What can they offer in terms of resources? Or we are just looking for water?
Yeah, Venus is too hot. But yeah, there's the other planets. They all have a different mix. I mean, I can't remember, one of the moons, was it of Saturn or Jupiter, has a lot of water. So you should probably go there and haul all your water out. But I think before we have to conquer these tyranny of distance and communication, we have to think in terms of baby steps. And human space flight is still relatively new. Even though, Hollywood and, entertainment is full of, movies about missions to Mars and whatever, no one's actually done it. It's completely new territory. So I think the moon is something that has to be conquered before we before we can start going anywhere else. And I know that there's people who say, well, let's, occupy Mars and stuff. Cool, great. But I really think that in terms of the technology steps that society, humanity has to go through, it's Earth, Moon, Mars, and then maybe some odd moon of Saturn or Jupiter is the next target.
Okay. So obviously we said that here this kind of require like some quite a few decades before we are going to see some concrete development. But it looks like the cost of investing in the space is quite prohibitive, because you require lots of money without even you're going to see a return on your investment. So what are your considerations on this point?
Yeah, I look at it from an individual investment and a global investment. So if you look at what's going on in the economies, with certain policies about how do I put it politely, sustaining economic growth via providing more money. When I was younger, $1 billion was a big number. Now $1 trillion is a big number. So, if the governments of the world really want to build back better and really want to, add more zeros on their monetary supply to do it, they're not actually creating that much more value. The value is what you build. So in infrastructure projects. So if a governments really want to build back better with better infrastructure and create jobs, well, why not go to the moon and create something really inspiring? So I look at that as like a global investment perspective. If they're going to spend all this money on infrastructure, do something meaningful where the outcome is resources from another planet, instead of going to some jungle and making a big hole and pulling out all the metals required for our smartphones and computers. Go to the moon, find them, use robotics, have some humans there as well. To me, it's a question of mentality and application of capital to pursue it. And
also having the right people, I guess.
Yeah, I think the right people are already there. The people I've met, there's so many inspiring people who want to do it. They'd quite happily, work on that area. For example, mining the moon. But the issue is that there's no political capital in the background pushing for it, because political capital is a very hard thing to build and get rewarded from. For most politicians, they will say, oh, we need to build more hospitals and roads and whatever, etc.
Or we need to win the election.
Yeah, we need to win an election, or they might have there might be a certain mood going on. For example, renewable energy might be a focus. So to me, it's like, well, fine. You want to build more solar panels? Why not build some in space? Take it out there. Why cover land mass in solar panels to achieve a goal when you can do it in space? Yeah. As well? But it is about educating the public about what is possible with space technology, and therefore you can get politicians to come on board, and then they can, they have to sell the concept as well to the public. But back to the individual, I've just talked about the global and almost governmental side of it. Back to the individual, the good news is that there are individual entrepreneurs and teams and developers and scientists, and then there's individual investors. And the good news about our current world is that through the advances in capital markets and with the whole kind of evolution of blockchain-based instruments, it's becoming a lot more easier for individuals to back individual teams who are focusing on kind of scratching away at this big issue. How do we make space mining possible? before we get to space mining, how do we make the ecosystem of infrastructure, I call it the strategic space value chain, possible? How do you implement, craft and refueling and servicing that makes a cislunar economy function? So that's the good news. We might never convince governments and politicians to do it, but I'm pretty sure that the individual might say, you know what, I'm going to invest a certain amount of money on this, and I'm going to, observe it, rather than treat it like a gamble on a stock.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's more like an intelligent way to allocate capital. If you have got something surplus, at least you can do something meaningful. But you mentioned about new technology, you mentioned blockchain. I'm really glad that you did, because on this channel, we talk a lot about blockchain and crypto projects. So how do you see the role of blockchain in the space?
It has promise. And there are developments coming along. I kind of think that the blockchain-backed way of, whether if you look at a securities token or a utility token, can be applied in many different ways. For example, if you're a company and you build a way of transmitting information, from Earth to Moon and back, and you need to raise capital. Well, to me, the bandwidth going back and forth could be split up into utility tokens. Okay. Whereas the funding of the company might be a securities token, you might also have a utility token, because it is utility. It's all in the definition. So blockchain has interesting implications and can be very innovative. And, we're always trying to look at how to apply it, because it's something that shouldn't be overlooked, because on one side of the blockchain, there's a lot of noise about, cryptocurrencies and altcoins, and they rise up and rise down and rise up and rise down. I kind of avoid the noise and just focus on the application of the it'd be very interesting to see how this comes along and how it can be developed to provide capital and early stage capital to companies that are introducing a new kind of technology. Interesting.
Yeah, I can see definitely the value. And as you said, we need to kind of watch how things evolve. But tell me a bit more about your company and what a space venture investors does.
Oh, well, what we do is we are a shareholder-driven company. We raise capital, and as a company, we've invested in pre-seed, early-stage startups to build what we call a strategic value chain, where we can work with each company and their business can help support what we're doing. So we started with Earth observation startups, and in the last 2 years, we've done a lot of put more effort into what you call our joint ventures and spin-offs, which includes a space commodities exchange, which is to try and work out how we can build products, financially traded products, where the commodity is something that can be used in a cislunar ecosystem. For example, how can you structure a product where you can forward order 100 liters of water or propellant to be delivered in 5 years' time to a certain orbit? So what we take is the concept of, the reality of existing exchanges and apply it to the next range of physical resources that will be required for a sustainable cislunar economy. So if there's a company that makes a space station and, they're going to have needs for resources, whether it's water or oxygen, two easy examples. So we want to create a marketplace where buyers and sellers can come together. And because space is inherently expensive, but the price of launch is going down and, technology is getting miniaturized, we want to create an environment where buyers and sellers can come together, and the volatility of price will lead to better price discovery, which means a more easier way to create business models and businesses in space. Another company we're working on is Lunar Resources Registry, where we're trying to work out how you can make a resources registry that is appealing to terrestrial mining companies and space resources companies, where they have some way of knowing what's on the moon and how to plan actual missions. So it's more analytical for us, analytical and understanding the space treaties and policies and Artemis Accords, and trying to work out, how do we make, moon mining possible and realistic within all these treaties and policy frameworks.
Yeah, very interesting. Listen, before we just wrap up the interview, just obviously come to my mind, entering the space is going to become quite like a political thing. How do you see that?
Yeah, there's always this kind of Cold War hangover on space, and you see it in the Outer Space Treaty. And then if you fast forward to the last 10 years, where you can see some governments really understand the importance of space resources. So to me, it was really the US and Luxembourg initiatives to put to provide a legal framework for the commercialization of space resources, knowing that, you can't own, and you can't go to the moon and say, yeah, I own this part. It's not going to happen. But it was important for these countries to provide a framework where, as a company, you could have a commodity taken from a space object, and they would respect that as a commercial, the ability for that to be traded. So you could add, so now you have a commerce section, or a way of stepping into commercial space resources. So, but back to the political side, is it took countries with the foresight to understand the importance of it and to make the steps forward to undertake it. But from a political point of view, it's still hard work trying to convince, politicians to convince the public that this is the right thing to do, particularly when, we kind of get blindsided by the big picture of space technology, and it's all possible. You almost think we're already on Mars. You almost think it's already happened, but we're not. We're so far behind the science fiction concept, and it costs so much to make these missions possible. But the good news is you have the political sphere, the political, narrative of what they want to do with space. Recently it's been more about looking down, as in Earth observation for environmental purposes, which is great. I've seen a lot of new companies come about, and they, working on amazing things, technology. But it still doesn't solve the problem of, politically, some of us want to get off this planet and do things.
Yeah.
And I don't think politically that the politicians can help us. I think it's more of a self-organizing thing. Yeah. That if you really want space resources, or, if you really, really, really want global internet, it's going to be the private companies that bring it about.
And I think definitely it will be good to see perhaps more individuals supporting private company on that, and perhaps that's where blockchain, that's where DAO's structure can come to kind of support the industry development in the industry. Yeah,
and I think what's interesting is, as an individual investor, particularly if you are younger, you have years, decades to see how these things play out.
Yeah.
So the previous investing mindset, which, you know, is nothing new. It's, you know, we've seen, you know, waves and crazes for hundreds of years, whether it's the SASE bubble, tulip mania, you know, these things come along and they kind of, they work on some psychological behavior of investors or gamblers, if you want to call them that, where it's all about immediate gains. Investing in space is for the long term.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people understand that. The conversations I've had with people who are space investors, you know, they get it. Like, it's almost interesting. You don't have to try and sell this, you know, concept, and they already understand it. And it's a case of, well, they want it, but you have to steward this kind of capital in the right direction, because we don't want to be in a situation where, you know, you have 100 space investments and 99 go down due to a crash. So that comes back to the responsibility of the business operator to say, you know, all right, you know, we want space businesses that are sustainable, that can last, that can survive recessions, depressions, and fulfill the goals that we set out to make, which in some cases are decades long. Interesting thing about blockchain is how can it handle succession? So, for example, you know, in the old days, you know, maybe your grandparent died and left you some share certificates for a company. All right. So how do we?
If they were Amazon, I would be quite happy, or maybe, you know, Apple or something like that.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, because, you know, back in the day when, you know, Apple and Amazon were, you know, dirt cheap, you know, was the time when there was, you know, blood on the streets, as, you know, an old investing professional once said, and which is the best time to buy. But in those times of craziness, it's very hard to think clearly.
Yeah.
You know, so, but interesting thing is, I think we're coming to a point of exhaustion in the macro environment, where things are going to have a nice little subtle avalanche down, which is a good time, you know, for people to say, well, you know, I'm ready to invest in something, and it's good that there's been a cleansing process. And with space, there's a lot of motivated teams. They understand the difficulties of what they're doing. They understand more about the capital raising process. There's more instruments. So now I think as a collective space investing community, the time is to, you know, do your homework, do your due diligence, look at it, and think of it as a long-term thing.
Yeah, Simon, thank you a lot. It was a great conversation.
Thanks, Steffiana.
It's really nice to explore new opportunities for people to invest for our future, you know, in something that is sustainable, rather than just focus only on the speculation element, on the gambling element, as a way, you know, to make money. I think we got to a point in time where, you know, we have to think next. We have to think about the next generation. And it's nice to observe how things are changing. But if you have got capital that you can deploy for something good, it's good to be educated and know what the options are.
Yeah, and look for companies that have a long-term vision. Like, for example, my vision is, I think my measure of success is if our grandchildren can have a job involving, you know, space resources.
Yeah.
And it might be something like, you know, they sit on Earth and operate a machine on the moon that, you know, sifts through regolith, or, you know, some kind of regolith processing plant to extract what we require. It might be something like that, but that's a good goal. I mean, if our grandchildren you know, don't have that ability of a job, then I think we've got to let ourselves down and let them down, because from that basis, their grandchildren will, you know, will have more interesting jobs, you know.
Exactly. Okay, Simon, thank you. And I hope to have you back on the show where we can talk more.
It'd be great.
About investing in the space industry. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks.